I awoke late this morning, my dreams having held on with their teeth. I was walking through the house, not the house I inhabit now, but a house that had once been the home of 8 Hargraves. The entryway was now a receiving room, a communal space with couches and sedan chairs, not a TV to be seen. There were bookshelves, though, great sagging edifices that looked to be in danger of collapsing under the weight of all those books. There was a harp in one corner, as well as a drum set, and every window had a box of growing things. This was a warm place, a place of respite for the family, but there was only one member of that family here. She flitted about like an angry hummingbird, growing and shrinking as she aged and regressed. Marguerite Hargrave had been beautiful, her dark hair existing in a perpetual tail as she walked through her life. One moment she was a gawky girl, doodling on the couch with her tongue between her teeth. The next she was drawing at an easel with the sun coming in behind her. She was climbing the stairs with a canvas, a girl in middle school. Then a taller girl in high school came back down in a paint-covered smock, her body still something she was getting used to. "She was mine," said a voice I was becoming familiar with. "My work of art. It was a shame she chose to turn her back on her patron." I followed her upstairs, a woman on the cusp of striking out on her own, and watched as she changed into a grown woman, returning to her home against her will. I followed her to the same room I had cleaned out, now filled with her things again. The walls were covered in art, the wallpaper all but hidden by the framed works. There was an easel here too, but what was on display was far from artistic. Marguerite lay on the floor of her room, a grown woman in her late 30s or early 40s. As I watched, her head turned back to look at me, her face a bleeding mask of euphoria. "Welcome to the family," she breathed, and I came awake as my heart galloped and my breath puffed like a bellows. One word followed me from sleep, a word whispered across my unconscious mind, like a promise of horrors to come. Venus. Breakfast that morning was toast and peanut butter, my stomach refusing to take much more. I sat there in my paint-covered overalls, still shaking at the thought of that blood-drenched face as it turned back to look at me. It isn't every day that you see a face as full of ecstasy as it is blood, and it would take a long time to get that image out of my mind. It was nearly 10 when I got started today, and I found myself heading to the third room on the left, little as I wanted to. Venus Hargrave did not have wallpaper in her room. The entire room, ceiling included, looked like a dance studio. The floor was wood, the bed one of those heavy sleigh beds that had been denuded of its mattress. That was the only thing that had been left behind, and the walls and the floor made me feel like I was being watched. They were covered with mirrors, and I couldn't imagine what it must have cost to put this together. The walls stretched and warped, picking up the reflection from the other walls, and it gave the place a pursued look. I felt eyes on me wherever I went, and I couldn't understand how anyone could live like this. I supposed that Venus wasn't living like this anymore, but after my dream last night, I doubted it. She was living some sort of life, whatever that entailed, and I knew there was likely to be a new player in my dreams tonight. There was nothing I could do with the sleigh bed, short of chopping it up. I decided to leave it there. I was wondering where today's story might be, up until I saw the tail of a letter poking from beneath the edge of one of the long mirrors. I sighed. I had really wanted to keep the mirrors, but I guess if I was careful, I could get them off the wall without breaking them. They appeared to be hung with screws, so I knew it couldn't be too hard to remove them. The plan lasted all of about 30 minutes, right up until I cracked the first one midway through. Screw it. I could buy more glass. One trip down for gloves, goggles, and my sledgehammer later, and the glass was everywhere. I should have put down tarps, but I didn't. I just smashed and smashed and smashed, and it felt good to take all that reflective surface down. It was like putting out the eyes that had watched me, and I relished it right up until the last swing. My heavy work boots made short work of the glass on the floor, and I soon had it swept up with a heavy work broom and loaded into industrial garbage bags with a shovel. It was past noon by then, and I finished taking down the boards it had been stuck to and found the story for the day. It was written in the same way, sentences that wound around the wall, but I had to wonder how he had done it when I had so little success with the mirrors. Maybe he had known how they went up and knew the best way to get them back into place. Maybe he had replaced them when he was done. I didn't know, and as I fell into the sad, sordid tale of Venus Hargrave, I found it didn't much matter. Venus Hargrave, second daughter of Melissa and John Hargrave, was born perfect. I say this with no sarcasm, only as a fact. She was studied as an infant for the flawlessness of her form. Her limbs were perfectly proportioned, her arms and legs perfectly symmetrical, her head the perfect circumference, and everything was the exact size and shape it should be. In fact, she was in the top 1 percentile of infants for her proportions. The doctor said at her birth that he had never seen an infant in better health and form. This was the start of Venus's pursuit of perfection, something she would never quite manage to achieve. Venus was a very photogenic baby, as demonstrated by the number of pictures of her around the house. Mother spent most of her time photographing her, dressing her, parading her around the nearby town. She was the belle of the play park, a debutante who still wore diapers, and people complimented her for her whole life. Her perfect skin, her perfect hair, her perfect poise. Perfect, perfect, perfect. It was a wonder there was any talent left for the rest of us. Mother never decided that Venus should be in pageants. Venus learned about them at 6 from a friend that she had made at her kindergarten and insisted that she be allowed to participate. The Hargrave parents allowed it, buying her dresses and lessons she needed to compete, but I believe that she could have gone on stage naked and still won. Venus did not compete in pageants. She dominated them. They were warfare for her, a kind of test of her beauty and grace, and Venus had been properly named for the task. She went through the local pageants, the contests of beauty, and the state and regional challenges, and was finally crowned Miss America. After that, it was only a matter of time before she was signed to one of those great flesh markets that we call modeling agencies, and at 16, she was approached. That's right. Venus was determined to be the most beautiful woman in the country before she could drive. Such things would be enough to turn any girl's head, and Venus was no exception. She had asked her father for the mirrors on her wall when she was 10 years old. Her looking glass was not up to the task, she claimed, and when Father asked her why she wanted them on the walls and the ceiling, she told him she needed to see herself from every angle. I would ask for the floors as well, but it would get pretty dirty, she told him, and we laughed. Venus, Vanity might have been a better name for her, thought a little too much of herself. There were always boys coming and going, those who wished to court my sister or just bask in her perfection, but Venus was never one to honor anyone with her glory, but herself. She never married, something my parents always found to be a shame, since it meant her perfection would never be continued. Venus told us once, just before she went to Paris and began modeling for an agency I couldn't pronounce, that she would never have children, not because she didn't want them, but because she was afraid they would outshine her. What if she gave birth to a child every bit as perfect as she had been? They would notice that she was getting older, that her perfection was beginning to wane, and she couldn't have that. Whether it was true or all in her head, who could say? She never married, never had children, but I suppose none of us did. We were all too involved in our own creations to be having children or spouses or anything else that might take up our time. When Father died, she was the most beautiful mourner of them all. Her mourning dress looked fresh from a catwalk, her anguish and sorrow a perfect performance for the onlookers. In truth, Venus had never cared for anyone but herself, and it showed when it came time to see who would stay and who would be free to go. She put forth any number of us, myself and Persephone chief among them, but for herself she had only excuses. She had to return to the catwalk. She was under contract. She was too talented to waste her time here. She must return to the people. Vanity was her sin, but predictability was her downfall. Venus had enjoyed a glass of wine since she was 14. It had started as a dare from our older brother, and every night after, she would have a glass as she threatened to tell our parents that he had forced her to drink it. Soon, we were all having a glass in the evening, but Venus's love of wine had only increased over the years. She would drink in the evenings, something we all knew too well, and it was easy to poison her. I put a hallucinogen in a bottle of wine and left it outside her door. I likely used too much, not caring if the drug killed her or if she tore herself apart. In the end, it was a little of both. She had always loved that room, the one with the mirrors on every wall, the one where even the ceiling smiled for her, but she didn't love it so much after that night. I don't know what she saw in those last moments of life, but it must have been terrible. She locked herself in for the night, and when John Jr. broke down the door after her screams woke us up, it was already too late. She would never see herself again, because she clawed her eyes out and turned them into runners of red that cut her face as surely as her nails had. I think that was when John Jr. really began to get suspicious, but by then, it was already too late. By then, I had plans in motion to be the one to gain all the favor. I would be the one who cut the chaff from the wheat, the one who was worthy of the name Hargrave. It was night when I finished, and I found that I had transcribed it as I knelt before the wall like a worshipper. There were slivers of glass in my knees, small and bothersome things, and I had to pick them out like the quills of a small porcupine. The story is beginning to come together, but I'm afraid of it. Carter Hargrave is either a madman, a murderer, or both. I wonder again how he wrote all those things behind the mirrors, especially when they appeared to have been there for decades. For that matter, how had he put the wallpaper back up without smudging or disturbing the words? Questions, questions, and more questions. That's all I get from this place. I'm exhausted. I'm turning in, no matter what dreams may come. I'm sure there will be more tales to come after a fitful night with the daughters Hargrave. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story, or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Army Dude for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton contributors. And thanks to Oh Snap, Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, Grim Reaper, TomBoiTopUwU, and Queen Sheebah for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. And a big thanks to Scott Donahue for being our Ghostly Writer tier contributor. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you'd like to support the channel, then come on down to Patreon or become a member on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton tier contributors, that's our $5 tier, get their spooky 12 hours early at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. My time, of course. And while Ghostly Reading is only a tier that's available on Patreon, you get a signed copy of my book anytime I write one on your doorstep in, hopefully, a timely manner. If you'd like a book, we have many on Amazon. I've got links below if you'd like to follow those. Should get you to my page so you can buy any one of my 8 books I believe we're up to now. I'm sure they'd look really nice on your shelf, and I'll sign them for you if you can find me out in the wild. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.